Grenton stared at the creature through the safety plex. That thing is wild. Selden agreed. Completely unique. What do you think our bonuses will look like? I'm going to buy a fucking moon. Grenton snorted laughter, his whiskers twitching in mirth. You dream big, my friend. Grenton stopped for a moment and stared at Selden, really stared at him. You've lost some weight. I went down to the medbay. Doc says nothing shows up from the scans. He's concerned about that thing passing something on when we got it into the holding pen. Selden unzipped his uniform and showed him the black dot on his shoulder. Several inch-long purplish lines stretched away from the quarter-inch block dot. It did this to me. Not sure what it's about if medbay scanners can't narrow anything down. Grenton's whiskers twitched in concern. He had convinced Selden to ship out with them after all. Don't show anyone else that. Selden's eyes scrunched up in confusion. Not even the doc. Grenton shook his head worryingly. They'll quarantine you the rest of the way. Almost 40 days of travel to the bazaar. That means 40 days of isolation that can unravel anyone. I don't want that to happen to you. Best to just monitor for now. Selden shook his head hesitatingly. Okay, that makes sense. Just nerves from my big bonus, right? Grenton smiled a wide smile. Stay healthy, my friend. I've got to get back to working on shuttle maintenance. It was good catching up. You should eat just for the sake of eating, by the way. It's a long journey to the Galactic Bazaar. Selden zipped his uniform back up. It's weird. I eat and eat. Nothing tastes right. Nothing's filling. Nerves? It wasn't easy getting that thing into restraints. Selden shrugged. Maybe. I've caught myself snapping at others on the ship. There's only 24 of us, so it's not like me to antagonize the only handful of people I can interact with on a trip this long. Grenton smiled and patted Selden's shoulder. You're conscientious enough to know that. You'll be fine out here. Selden salivated as he stared down the hall at his shuttle pilot and friend, Grenton. Hey, Sale. You okay? Selden quickly closed his mouth and turned to greet his supervisor. His eyes found his supervisor's eyes. I'm fine, sir. I've just been a little off-kilter since we handled that human specimen. His supervisor, Docton, smiled warmly. His whiskers positively beamed with the knowledge of their reward. That was an interesting catch, and it's such a unique specimen. Selden stared down at his feet, his whiskers drooping in confusion. So unique, unlike anything you've ever caught. Yes, the Galactic Bazaar will pay handsomely for it. Bonuses for all of us. We'll be able to take on more crew after this hunt. It touched me. Docton grew concerned. Selden had gone back to leering at Grenton further down the hall. Docton wondered if this had anything to do with the disappearance of one of the guards. What do you mean it touched you? It reached out past the restraints somehow. It touched my shoulder. Has Medbay scanned you? You do look rather thinnish lately. Selden continued his stare at Grenton. I've eaten and eaten, but it didn't satisfy. Only one thing so far. Medbay was empty when I went down there last. He's around. Just have them check you out. Selden turned to eye Docton, his whiskers jerking haphazardly, his fists balled and unballed. Sir, maybe you could join me down there. Docton didn't like the glance Selden was giving him. Still, he decided, he had to put on a positive face for the crew. He was their rock, after all. And morale had suffered since the guard, Frusselton, had gone missing. When he figured out where that slacker was hiding, of course, Selden, we'll head down to the medbay together to get you seen to. There's lots of devices down there. Lots. They'll help. It's a pretty well-stocked medbay. Why do you say devices, though? Selden almost drooled but held it in as he stared anew at his supervisor. Just an observation, Doc Deedin. I'm starving. Could we head down to the medbay together, right now? Sure thing, Sale. We'll have lunch afterwards. Grenton inched towards his friend as the lights flickered in the wrecked lounge. Selden, we can help you. But you have to help us help you. Selden kept gnawing on the severed limb, a cleaver within arm's reach. Just so hungry, so hungry. Grenton kept inching forward with the cook, Astleton, and the cartographer, Brunselton. All of their whiskers were rigid with fear. Only Astleton had been able to arm himself. A fire hatchet gripped tightly in his hands. The armory had been destroyed by an unknown crew person. Not so unknown, thought Grenton. We'll get that taken care of, Selden. Just please. You're infected with some kind of organism. We'll get you into the med bay and detour to the nearest medical facility. Everything will be as it was one day. Selden sat up and then stood. His whiskers drooped on one side of his face. Patches of fur were missing. Emaciated looking, but with a belly beginning to bulge. I can't go back like this. Will you help me? Brunselton flinched as Selden took a step towards them. We need to kill him, Gren. He's too far gone. He's not to anything. He just needs to be sedated so we can help him. Astleton lost his patience. He's gone. I know he's your best friend, but he's gone. He'll kill us too. Selden moved faster than Grenton had ever seen him move. He embraced Astleton and bit deep into his neck. The fire hatchet flew out of Astleton's hands in blind panic, landing in a puddle of gore. Grenton stood frozen in place as Brunselton joined the fray to free Astleton. Astleton gripped his neck and fell screaming to the floor, his life leaking hard and fast from a jagged, gaping wound, while Brunselton grappled with Selden. Help me, goddammit! Help me! We can take him! Grenton went for the cleaver at the table Selden had been feeding at and turned around in time to witness Selden brutally snap Brunselton's neck. The pop seemed to echo in the lounge as the lights flickered again. Grenton, in shock, backed himself into the corner by the door as Selden slowly stood up. Grenton began to babble as he realized that Selden had somehow grown stronger in his state. We didn't have to go to that planet. We didn't. We shouldn't have. Grenton slid across the wall towards the exit, never taking his eyes off Selden. This is my fault. I convinced you to come. I talked the captain into another run to Earth. It can be as it was. We can fix you. Selden casually walked to the table, to the meal he had been enjoying before being disturbed. The lights flickered for a moment again as he reached down and grabbed the fire hatchet off the floor. Selden licked the blood and viscera off the edge, splitting his tongue and lips. Selden brandished the hatchet at Grenton and sported a bloody grin. What's there to fix? Grenton sprinted down the hallway. His footsteps reverberated in the deserted corridors. Eventually, he slipped around a corner near the holding pen, his pounding heart echoing in his ears. He tried to force his breathing back to normal as he panted his lungs out. Grenton peeked around the corner but saw nothing. He still couldn't believe it, couldn't even process the grief. Selden had gone insane. He had had trouble accepting it himself and gotten others killed. Dusselton had tried to warn him before the rampage had begun, but he had insisted they try to capture Selden alive. Treat him. He's one of us, Grenton had reminded him. And Dusselton's reward was for Selden to bury a cleaver into the back of his skull. And then he'd gotten the cook and the cartographer killed. Grenton looked down at his wrist communicator. Still dead. How many were still alive? Was he the only one? He imagined he could still hear Selden pounding his blood-soaked fists on the door he had jammed shut. They'll be able to fix him once they made it to a port, he decided. They just have to make it to a port. Would they, though? The thought raced through him like an electric current. Who the hell would believe him? Wouldn't it be easier to just try them both and execute them? The grief threatened to well up from deep within himself. He felt his mouth water, as if he would vomit. Would they think he was a part of the mayhem? Could they even fix Selden? It was his fault they had even gone to that hellhole of a planet. The humans had abandoned it. Clearly for good reasons. What kind of organism makes you go insane? He head swam with options when he heard the voice. Come, child of the stars. So close. Grenton snapped straight up and challenged the unfamiliar voice. Who's there? You know. You've known since you set eyes upon me. I don't. But you do. So close. Grenton turned and realized exactly where he was. Containment. The holding pen, as they called it, was directly next to him. With trepidation, Grenton approached the lock of the door. "All the answers you want." Grenton placed a hand on the manual lock, then slowly withdrew his hand from the locking ring. He peered through the small viewing port on the door. The voice in his head softly laughed, cautious, wise, but unnecessary. The voice was right, Grenton decided. The enclosure was sealed shut, the viewing plex intact. Grenton placed his hand on the electronic lock, heard the chime of the acceptance, then disengaged the manual lock. The door opened slowly and revealed the specimen standing on the other side of the viewing plex. Yellow eyes in shallow sockets, nothing but bone on an elongated skull, curious ragged antlers atop the skull. Grey papery skin stretched tight over its staggeringly tall and stooped body. Only its belly defied it, bulging unhealthily. The specimen cocked its head at him. "I can fix it all, you know." Grenton swallowed, then licked his lips. He wasn't sure when his mouth had gone so dry. It can be as it was. "How can you possibly talk inside my head?" The creature's soft laugh in his head again. Then a growl emanated from the viewing plex, followed by a subdued roar of sorts. The voice in his head returned. "Easier this way. Trust me." "I'm betting you want me to let you out." "Such a bargain. But you would never." "You're goddamn right I wouldn't. After everything that's happened, make way to command deck. I have coordinates." Back to that corpse world? Humans don't even live on Earth anymore. It's a heritage and nature preserved for them since they last wrecked the place in some war of theirs. Why do you think it's so lucrative to break their security blockade and grab specimens for the bazaar? The soft laughter again, narrow thinking, wish to expand, new appetite. "You think I'll just drop you off on my world?" "Fuck you, card knock." Grenton narrowed his eyes and took several steps up to the viewing plex. His ragged breathing the only sound in the room. He never thought about it before. The thing didn't seem to breathe. Why there? Hard world. Many famines. Enemies of your people. Yes, bargain. "We didn't actually capture you, did we?" Soft laughter rumbled in his head. Grenton frowned. Anger lit up in him. "This thing, I'm just a toy to it. Did this enclosure even hold it back? Could it hear his every thought? Could he even refuse its terms and live? What's in it for me? I can tell you where to bury, how to bring them back." "Bring back how if I bury them? That doesn't make any sense. Some ground has power. I am guardian of one such place." "I'm not saying I believe you, but where?" "Beyond the barrier, not far from where you took me. I can show." "What barrier?" The soft laughter again. "You may hear voices, you may see things, but do not leave the path. There has to be more than that. You bury your own." Grenton hurried through the foggy swamp with Selden in his arms. The stims he had taken, giving him the strength he never could have pulled off with almost days of no sleep. Selden was practically nothing in his arms. He could hear the security team following. Low chatter and the occasional snapping of a twig behind him was all he heard of their progress towards him. Even they're spooked, Grenton decided. A voice called out from the security team. "Give yourself up, Grenton. Hasn't this gone on long enough?" Grenton kept his head down, staring at his feet, so that he could only see 10 feet in front of him in the fog. He had already learned that if you tried to get your bearings, you lost the trail, and there was something out here waiting for you if you left the trail too far. Was it the same creature, or a twin of sorts? How did it work? Grenton stopped for a moment, as a cry that sounded like a scream echoed across the landscape. The sound seemed to twist into a kind of soft sobbing. This place is all wrong. It had claimed to have been a guardian. Grenton wondered, not for the first time, if it was really a prisoner, doomed to haunt an empty planet devoid of intelligent life. He looked down at Selden, at the wound where Grenton had buried the fire hatchet in his chest and finally ended the nightmare. He didn't have a choice. They were going to arrest him and Selden. He had had to release Selden from his confinement in the shuttle they came down on, and he had done the thing he dreaded most, but he had had no choice. The security team they sent would have captured them both. They had backtracked the coordinates of their ship he had programmed to land on Cartnock, and found all the slaughter. He should have thought of that. He should have thought of a lot of things, he mused. Grenton yelled back over his shoulder. It told me how to save him, to bring him back. Leave this place, and I'll prove it after. The sound of snapping trees could be heard in the distance. A roar emanated from the trees somewhere beyond. He could hear the low chatter of the security team, but Grenton wondered how much was simply the echo of the standing pools of water surrounding him. They could be far away, or they could be 20 feet behind him. The sound was funny that way out here. It tricked me, Selden yelled out. But it had to tell me something true to convince me. The ground is real. I know it. I had to kill the others. They came back wrong. But I can fix it this time. They were dead a long time, but not Selden. He's fresh. A sound like soft crying floated through the landscape. Abruptly, it twisted into a scream of rage again, followed by a roar. The sound of trees snapping grew louder, while the clamor of the security team faded. Grenton decided the security team had lost their nerve, and the creature wasn't going to let its next meal escape so easily. Grenton took the opportunity to continue on the trail. Head down, he found his way again somehow. He didn't understand how that worked, but it did. He had made this trip multiple times and still didn't understand it. He heard screams and plasma fire behind him. Cries of pain and fear mixed with the creature's roars seemed to envelope him. Then nothing. It grew quiet. No more voices. No more screams. No more snapping trees. No wind. Not even insects. Just the sound of his labored breathing and footsteps in the marshy bog. Several times he felt that something was reaching out for him, to touch him, but the feeling always subsided after a few moments. Grenton finally came to the rock wall. Ancient etchings covered it. They were warnings. He was convinced of it. The more you bend the laws of nature, the greater the cost, he decided. But maybe the rewards also. Grenton looked down at his childhood friend, then back up the path worked into the rock wall. He began his slow ascent to the burial ground.